When Tamme Smith's 7th grade son, Thomas, was targeted, humiliated, and physically attacked at school for being different, she didn't just go to the school board. She wrote an open letter to the parents of the bullies and posted it on social media. Her words weren't just powerful, they were honest, heartbreaking, and courageous. In a world where silence is often easier, Tamme made a maverick move. Today, she's here to tell her story and to speak up for every child who's ever felt alone, excluded, or broken by bullying. This is an episode about pain, resilience, and a mother's refusal to stay quiet. My name is Gina L. Osborne, and I'm an Army veteran. I spent 6 years during the end of the Cold War as a counterintelligence agent. I was appointed as an FBI agent, and during my 22-year career, worked everything from Asian organized crime to terrorism. I became the Assistant Special Agent in charge of cyber and computer forensics. And then I came out of retirement and spent 2 years as the Safety and Security Officer at LA Metro. Now I'm here to help you make your maverick move. Welcome to the show, Tamme.
Thank you so much.
Tamme, when I heard your story, it broke my heart. So tell us what caused you to write a letter to the parents of the kids who are bullying your son, Thomas.
Middle school's tough for everyone. It's really tough, but it was especially tough on my son, Thomas. 7th grade was a nightmare. I couldn't get him to go to school. I couldn't get him to stay at school. Sorry. We just couldn't figure out what was happening. His friends dropped him. He was choked on the playground, like at lunchtime, by a random 6th grader, so a younger student. He was made fun of constantly. He didn't have anyone to eat lunch with. He was beat up in the bathroom. And on social media, I was noticing that it was the end of the year, and so all these wonderful parents were making these awesome posts about how wonderful their child's last year at school was, right? And Johnny did this, and Sarah did that, and I love it. I love to see all that. But that isn't the case for everyone's school year, right? And it was especially not the case for Thomas. Mm-hmm. So even though this is my private social media account, it was kind of cathartic for me to just throw it out there and let our friends and family know that here's the real truth of what happened to our son in 7th grade. And it was terrible. So I thought, how do I do this? Do I just say, here it is, this is what happened to our kid? Or do I write a letter to them and just say, here it is, this is what happened to Thomas? And I truly hope that all of their kids did have a great year, but my son was tortured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So before you get to that point, because bullying, whether it's cyberbullying or physical bullying that Thomas went through, bullying is bullying where there is a victim. Sometimes the victim will tell their parents, sometimes they won't. So walk us through, what was it like for you when you started to notice that something was different?
So his group of friends, I had just started noticing there was a dance that had come up and there was a parent permission slip. And Thomas handed me the permission slip and I said, are your buddies going? And he said, oh, I don't know, Mom. And I'm like, do you want me to reach out to the moms and see if they're going? Because boys don't really communicate, right? So I reached out to the moms and I heard from one of them and she had said, oh, I don't think they're going. So I'm like, oh, okay, Thomas, I guess they're not going. So I'm like, do you still want to go by yourself? No, Mom, I don't want to go by myself. Okay. So the day that the permission slip was due, Thomas came home from school and said that at lunchtime he watched his 2 quote-unquote friends take their signed permission slips out of their backpacks together and walk to the ASB office to turn in their permission slips. And I said, they never said anything to you? And he said, no. I said, did you say something to them? And he's like, well, I didn't know what to say. So I reached back out to the moms and said, hey, I didn't know that the boys were going, and we just found out today. And one of the moms said, oh, he can still turn in the permission slip today, trying to cover it up. And I said, no, it's already due. It's past the deadline now, so he can't go. And now he actually doesn't really want to go. Who would want to go if you're not included, right? And these are your friends, and if your friends don't want you there, then what are you supposed to do? So I started noticing things like that. And there was a day that they got out of school early, and I happened to be at the mall, and I saw that same group of boys with their whole crew, and my son was at home. So again, he wasn't included. And then I started asking him, like, who are you hanging out with at lunch? And he's like, I'm trying to hang out with them, but they're not wanting to hang out with me anymore. They started calling him names and making fun of him. And when that happens at any school, it like spreads like wildfire, right? So we started contacting the school and asking them, hey, can you give us a little support here? Because we're not sure what's going on. And is there someone Thomas can talk to about this? And oh yeah, when there's an incident at school, then go ahead and make sure Thomas talks to an adult on campus. So when incidents would occur, he'd either be left out or be called names, or he was threatened in the hallways. He did just that. He would go to the school officials, tell them what happened. Well, then they would bring those other boys in for investigating to find out what happened. And they did what most teenagers do, is lie. No one's going to really tell the truth. So nothing would happen. Thomas would still feel uncomfortable at school. Then he started really having nobody to have lunch with, and they started teasing him and calling him names. The R word, which I don't like. They called him stupid. And he just kept telling me, like, I have no friends at school, and everybody makes fun of me when I'm there, Mom. And then he kept being teased, and then that last incident of he was literally choked on the playground at lunch, and it was the principal who pried her hands off of that sixth grader's neck. And I don't even know if anything happened to that kid. Like, parents aren't being called in anymore to have conferences with each other so that everyone knows what's going on. I'm not sure what their behavior consequences are, but it always just seemed that they were right back at school the next day anytime that happened. And then they were constantly retaliating against Thomas, right? Now Thomas has a target on his back, and there's nothing you can do about it.
So the school was saying there has to be an incident before they'll do something about it.
Correct, right? Okay. Or they had to have all the facts and everybody's story had to line up. Well, if you get a group of kids, do you really think their stories are going to line up? Probably not. One of the remedies, at one time the administration had suggested for Thomas to spend his school day in the office. So that would be more of a punishment for him, right? Where, okay, he's being bullied and attacked and ridiculed on campus, but to keep him safe, you're just going to put him in the office, which we didn't feel that was necessarily good for Thomas's mental health either, right?
Sure. Well, and Thomas, he has dyslexia.
Yes.
So that adds an entire other element into this thing.
When you are neurodiverse, your brain is different. So your processing is different. How you articulate can be different. And Thomas is dyslexic. He has dysgraphia and dyscalculia. So it's all three forms of dyslexia: his reading, his writing, and math. And he also has auditory processing. If you were to see him or meet him, and I wish he was here today, you wouldn't necessarily know. But sometimes he says things backwards, or it doesn't come out the way that he intended. So that's hard for him too, trying to come home and communicate what happened. And then now he's being in front of all these different administrators and having to tell them what happened. And it It was a terrible crisis situation. It was awful to try to get him to go to school. And then it was just a matter of time every day that I'd be working that my phone would start blowing up and it would be, I can't stay here. I don't feel safe here. I don't have friends. I feel like I'm going to throw up. And then he'd make his way to the nurse's office and they would call and say, your son is sick. He says he has a headache. I'm like, he doesn't have a headache, but we'll come get him. Or he'd call one of his grandfathers and they would be at the school before I could even say, like, hey, take a deep breath, try to stay there. But what we started realizing is, why are we the ones that we keep pushing him to stay in this situation, right? Mm-hmm. So I had wrote this letter and posted it on social media, and the outpouring of support and love was amazing, and resources, and give Thomas my number, I'll hang out with him. That was so awesome. Mm. But the best part of the whole thing was, at one point, I mistakenly allowed this Storm MMA boxing facility to follow me because I thought it was an old friend of mine. And this young man, he's an adult, but he's young to me, reached out to me and said, no one should ever have to go through what your son is experiencing. And I don't know if he would ever try a boxing lesson, but I would love to give him a boxing lesson to maybe give him his power back. Mm.
Wow.
So I asked Thomas, and he always says no the first time I ask him something new to try something. No, Mom. And then I have to kind of convince him and walk him through it. And it was an immediate yes. And I'm like, you don't even know this person and you want to try boxing? And he's like, heck yes. So we went and had a very first private lesson with Aldair at Storm MMA. And he changed our life.
Oh, my gosh. How so?
He has been the most positive influence for Thomas that isn't a family member. He's not a friend. He's a complete stranger. And he just met Thomas right where he was and started giving him the gift of exercise and learning how to defend himself, but also learning that he didn't do anything to deserve that. And he is in charge of himself and can do anything that he wants to now. That no one ever should make him feel like that.
Yeah. No. I think that, through this tragedy comes this triumph with, that human touch of people understanding what your family is going through. And I think that's the most beautiful part of the story, is the fact that the community felt the pain that you were going through. So how did you feel as his mother because so many parents are going through this, whether it's cyberbullying or the same type of bullying?
Yeah.
What were you feeling as the parents when he would come home and he was going through all of this?
Well, to be honest with you, my husband and I don't necessarily always take our children's word first. Mm-hmm. We have always played devil's advocate and, are you sure you've done nothing wrong? Could you have possibly done something wrong? We play both sides. Teacher's always right. Respect your elders. Respect the staff, right? Like, what's your part in all this? And he's like, I honestly don't know. So when he would come home, Jeff and I would just be like, we don't know what's going on. Or is he just having some crazy anxiety? Could he be misinterpreting what's happening? Anything's possible, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't this malicious intent. It wasn't something that we could visually see, like cyberbullying, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And when you have a child who's neurodiverse, and their sentences and their retelling of a story isn't necessarily like methodical or in perfect sequence, Jeff and I are like trying to, figure out like what is going on. And we're like, if this is really happening, are you telling someone? Well, I didn't tell someone today, or there wasn't anyone there today for me to talk to, or just a multitude of factors. So every day that this kept happening, or at first it was, one day this week, and the next week it was another day, and it kept ramping up. And then the minute I started realizing, wait, his friends are really excluding him now, and he didn't want to go hang out with this group. And then there was a child who was in his special ed classes who started making fun of him too. And we're like, hey, bro, don't throw stones, right? You're both in the same class together. You're in the same situation. Like, you would think that they would support each other more than your norm, but it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. To see your child in pain and not be able to do anything about it. It's terrible. It's terrible.
So how did you involve the school? At what point did you involve the school?
Right away, every day. We had so many phone calls. I showed up and talked to the principal and the assistant principal. My husband and I spent every day, and you call them and you're waiting for them to call you back, or you send an email, and that takes forever to respond. And I'm trying to contact his special ed teachers who I know on a little different, more personal level at the school. We held meetings. We had IEP conferences because he's in an IEP since first grade. And we kept saying, like, what are we doing to help Thomas? And we added more counseling for him. We added meetings with the school psychologist. But it wasn't really about what we realized was what's happening to those other kids. Because Thomas would say, like, nothing happened to them. They're still there. They still have their same mentality towards me. They're still verbally attacking me. They're still not being nice to me. I don't want to walk in their direction. He didn't want me to pick him up at some certain spot for fear of he knows that all those other kids walk that direction after school. So we're all taught that you send your kids to school and they're supposed to be safe there, just as safe as they are at home. And when they're not, this is the worst. It's the worst.
So what did the school do right, and what did the school do wrong?
I think they were trying. Jeff and I do think that they were trying with the tools and the power that they have to follow through with their policies, a behavioral contract, bring the kids in for investigating. I think that's what they're allowed to do for lack, I'm not sure. What they did wrong, I don't think they actually believed Thomas that it was happening.
Wow.
I really don't. And little things starting off as excluding can turn into something bigger, like him getting beat up in the bathroom.
So after the incident where he was beat up in the bathroom, then that was kind of the game changer, right?
That was the pivotal moment where we were like, we're done. We're done. We're done. We're done. And I talked to the principal, and she ensured me that Thomas would still be safe at school, and that she was going to be there the next day, and that they were going to bring in all those boys for questioning one more time, and to please have Thomas come to school one more time. So we agreed, and we got Thomas to agree, and he knew what was happening. And he went to school, and he was pulled in for questioning, and the boys were pulled in for questioning like one by one. And the last boy told the truth of what had happened, what he had witnessed, and thankfully for him. But at that point, my husband and I were just like, we were over it, because the minute they all got questioned and went back on that campus, the retaliation came all over again. The name calling, why are you a snitch? Why are you tattling on us? Like, why are you such a baby? Like, and he just came home and he said to us, I can't do this anymore. And we said, okay, no problem. We're done too. It just wasn't working. And if something's not working, why are you keep trying to force it? But It was scary. Even though the situation was awful and it wasn't working, it's still scary.
Yeah.
Because the next school year had already started. And here we are just yanking our kid out of school. So now what, right? And when you have a child who's had an IEP since first grade, they do have special services and accommodations for them, which public schools, majority of the time, that they can cater to kids like that, right? Private schools, it's much harder, although it's possible, but public schools do have the accommodations.
Yeah. So at what point did you get an attorney?
Okay, so we pulled him out of school, put him on an independent studies contract for 2 weeks, and went like crazy all over Orange County looking for a school for him. And there was one school that we hadn't seen, but I happened to be friends with the director of the Johnson Academy in San Juan Capistrano. It's a school for dyslexia. So on a Saturday, I called her. She was driving to Vegas. She already knows Thomas, and now she knew what had happened to Thomas. And what we had realized simultaneously in those 2 weeks that he was on that independent studies contract, his testing scores from the beginning of the year came out. And at this point, he was in 8th grade, and he was at a 2nd grade level for reading and math. He was just pushed all along, and every time they would make us feel like, oh, this is normal. This is normal for someone with his abilities or disabilities, and we believe them. But that's too big of a gap for any student who has one more year before they go to high school.
Right.
So in talking with Michelle, she's another angel in our lives, and she said, Thomas has to come to the Johnson Academy. It's the only place for him. And she said, I want you to call this person. She is a civil rights attorney. Her name's Amanda Selogie, and she is part of the Inclusion Education Project, which we loved. And so I got off the phone with her, and Jeff came back from a run, and I said, sit down, I've got some news, and here we go. So we reached out to Amanda, and she wanted to hear our case, and they only take cases that they feel are more or less a home run, and that would be beneficial for all parties involved. So in seeking legal counsel with her, she walked us through the due process, and through mediation, we agreed to a settlement with the school district. And we're super happy about that and very thankful and very grateful. And it was an interesting process to go through. It was longer than we expected and more emotions, right? This whole thing is super emotional, but I feel like you just have to keep going and you have to advocate for your kid. Even if it's scary, even if you don't know if it's necessarily right. But in your heart of hearts, when you know that something is off, then speak up, go ask questions, show up at the school, ask other parents, look for help.
Is there anything you would have done differently throughout this entire experience?
Well, that's a good question. Honestly, seeing how successful Thomas has been at this dyslexia school, I wish we put him there sooner. That's a big regret now. But he started there in October and he finished in June. He read 28 books.
Wow.
28 books. And he has a new love for reading. And he also just felt seen. And he felt normal because now he was in an environment where there was other kids like him.
Mm-hmm. That's a great lesson. Well, going back to that letter that you sent out to the parents, the parents of Thomas's former friends, who I'm sure that you know these parents because they had all been friends.
Yeah.
What did you tell them? What did you tell them in that letter?
Oh, gosh. It was a year ago. But I wanted them to know the struggles of what was happening to Thomas. So I told them that I hope their child, had a successful year at school and got straight A's while my child struggled to read and write. I hope that their child, had a great day on campus when my child was eating lunch by himself and your children were still making fun of him. And I hope that they enjoyed their school experience while my son hid in the bathroom a lot at school. It was my only way to let them know. Because like I said, schools don't really pull in families anymore of, hey, this is what's going on with Johnny and Stacy, and let's try to work things out. They don't do that anymore. And a lot of parents, when they hand I'm not blaming or shaming, it's just an observation. But when parents give their kids these cell phones, parents tend to stop parenting because they think, oh, they have a cell phone, they're in charge now, they're mature now, they can make their own plans, they can communicate with their friends. But it's almost the opposite. Those phones, that internet, those devices, they bring a whole nother host of problems where I think the parenting just begins.
Mm-hmm. What needs to change?
I wish we could go back to like when it was 1985 and times were simpler and you had to call the Smith house to see if Thomas was home, and you would ask Mrs. Smith, if Thomas was home, and Mrs. Smith would say, oh, hey, buddy, how's it going? I heard you hit a home run in your baseball game, and you had a connection. Mm-hmm. I think the connection is lost. Mm-hmm. It's lost. And people may judge me and think I'm a helicopter mom or a tiger mom, but we're involved in our kids' lives. Mm-hmm. And I want to know who you are. I want to know who the friends are. I want to know who the families are. And I wish more people kind of went back to, let's be all in with our kids, right? Let's watch TV together as a family. Let's go for a walk on the beach together as a family instead of, oh, I got to get this one to that sport and this one to that sport and this one has this and this one has that. It just feels like everyone, their lives have sped up. We're all way too busy. Mm-hmm. And I just think that maybe that would make a difference. Some more check-ins with your children.
Right. So would there have been a way within that neighborhood and that group of friends with the parents to come together and try and talk about it, or was it just finger pointing at that point?
I don't think so. I think it just turned into finger pointing. At one point, I did reach out to one of the moms and said, after I found out about he wasn't included in those moments and outings, I asked her, I said, could you find out if something's going on for me or if Thomas did something? Because we would like to learn from this and grow. And we're not sure what happened, and Thomas isn't sure what happened. So she said, no problem. I'll ask my son and get back to you. And I said, great. So she got back to me, and her response was, oh, my son says there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
So I would also like to encourage parents, if there's a parent reaching out to you, asking for help or asking what's going on, there's definitely something going on. Mm-hmm. And it would be helpful to open those lines of communication so the finger pointing doesn't happen, and so it doesn't turn into a crisis situation where a kid doesn't feel comfortable going to school.
Mm-hmm. So right now, there is a mom or a dad or mom and dad listening to this right now.
Yeah.
And they're going through the exact same thing.
Yeah.
The despair.
Yeah.
The heartbreak.
Right.
What do you say to them? And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
First of all, I'd want to give them the biggest hug that I can. And second of all, no one knows your child better than you do as their parents. So if it's not working, whether it's a sports team that they're on, their school environment, make that change. no matter how old they are. And it doesn't have to be you have to now drive an hour commute to get them, right, to go to a different school or to be on a different sports team. But open up lines of communication, try to communicate with other parents, try to communicate with the school or the coaches. But if it's not working, make the change. Because for us, the outcome was better than we could have ever imagined, ever. And Thomas is thriving. And that's what we all want, right? Is you want your children to thrive.
Absolutely. And you also hit on the cell phone issue.
Oh.
I always, whenever I would go out and I would talk to parents about cyberbullying and cybercrime and all of that, those phones belong to the parents. And I think the minute that the parent hands it to the child, if they think that that is the child's phone, that is their first mistake.
You're 100% right.
Because it is so important. And when you hand that child that phone for the very first time, make sure that they are aware. We're going to be looking at your phone.
Yes.
We have monitors on your phone. This is not your phone. This is a phone that you can use.
Yes.
And then that way, and never let them, and I know this is harder when they get older as teenagers, but watch them because you don't know who they're talking to on that phone. And that's where child predators come into it and all of the rest. So it is so important for parents to know that those cell phones, we have to think of them in a different way if we want to keep our kids safe.
Agree.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to talk one more time about the hero.
Okay.
Besides you.
Oh, geez.
Of this story is Aldair.
Yeah.
For him to reach out to you after seeing that letter and volunteer his time and the fact that it made such a significant difference in Thomas's life because he's still going there, right?
He's still going there a year later. And the cool part was the timing that when he had met Aldair, he was turning 14. So when you are 14 in a gym in California, you're actually considered an adult. So Thomas, this gym opened up all their classes. So he was able to take a kid class if he felt comfortable there. He could take an adult class if he felt comfortable there. And that became his summer camp for that summer between 7th and 8th grade. But every time Thomas sees Aldair, he saw him last night, he took a class, and he came home and he's like, Mom, I just love that guy. He's so great. He comes home and his adrenaline is through the roof. He's a sweaty mess and he's had such a great time. He's learned about exercise and how beneficial it can be for your mental health, right? You and I know that. But he also has a friend for life. He has a mentor that if Jeff and I can't help him, I know Aldair will be there for Thomas.
That's a beautiful part of the story. And it's sad that he had to go through what he went through in order to get there. But the fact that he's doing so much better in school and he has this whole community around him, that is a happy ending for sure.
Yes, the happiest.
The happiest. Tamme, thank you so much for telling your story on the show. You're going to help a lot of people. And I just want everyone to know that if they go to GinaLosborne.com, we're going to have a guide for parents who are going through this and what they need to do and how they can keep their kids safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Making Maverick Moves with Gina L. Osborne is produced and edited by Zill Media. Connect with us on social media at GinaLosborne.com/Making Maverick Moves. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Making Maverick Moves wherever you get your podcasts.